What's going on, guys? So today I wanted to go ahead and talk about Axton the Commando and why a lot of people think that he is the worst character or class in Borderlands 2.
Man, shut your...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome your beautiful faces to a new sort of content on this channel, where today we're going to be looking at a full in-depth guide on how to play Axton in Borderlands 2. Now, a lot of people will see Axton and they will think, well, he is objectively the worst character in this game. But to that I say, you're probably right. However, he is the most fun, in my opinion, and he has a good amount of build diversity to make it interesting compared to someone like Salvador, where as such, I will be showing a couple different ways to play Axton, and I'll be showing a full rundown of all his skills and what you should take and what you shouldn't, alongside a vault full of all sorts of gear that you can use. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I am using the BL2 fix mod and the unofficial community patch. However, do keep in mind that these do not change the loot in any real way besides buffing certain gear and items. So, it is advisable that you use these mods to make Axton better, because he just performs a lot better when he has those buffs from it. But keep in mind it's not required, so if you don't want to run the mods, you don't have to. I will link in the description the two mods on Nexus Mods, and from there you can just download them, run them, and you'll be all Gucci. Alright, so starting things off with the skill tree. Of course, you're going to want to grab your saber turret. A lot of people undervalue this skill a good bit compared to the other action skills in this game, but I think the real utility of it comes from the slide capstone that you get at the end of the gorilla tree, and as well as just the ability to draw aggro away from Axton, so you don't need to worry as much about survivability. So of course, you're always going to want to take that. We'll start over here in the gorilla tree, where first up we have sentry. Now, this skill is almost always a take, especially if you're doing a turret build, because the benefit of increased turret duration is just really good, as well as firing more shots just means more slag, which is always a good thing. So I will usually recommend picking this up. However, on the other side here we have ready, which increases reload speed. Now this skill I think is always a must grab, because it's just a free 40% reload speed that you just always will want to have. Next up we have laser sight. Now laser sight I find to be a pretty useless skill because I'm not a big fan of turret based builds, so I will usually steer away from this skill. However, it might be a good idea to throw 1 point into laser sight, as it gives your turret a laser sight on it, as you would expect, and that can help you see what the turret is targeting, so you can see what's going to get slagged and you can prioritize your targets that way. Other than that, I wouldn't recommend any more points unless you're doing a solely turret based build. Next up we have willing. Willing improves your shield recharge rate and shield recharge delay. The thing about Axton is he's really good at utilizing his shield to stay alive, so unless you are doing a build with the Rough Rider, which of course doesn't have any shield capacity, I would advise you always 5-5 this skill, because it's just so useful to have 75% shield recharge rate and minus 60% delay. It's just really, really good, always. I will also say the same thing for Onslaught, where Onslaught is just free gun damage and free movement speed. It just makes the game more fluid to play. I can never see myself not taking this skill here. Then we get to Scorched Earth. Now, in the normal game, many people will not advise you grab Scorched Earth. However, when using the community patch, Scorched Earth is augmented to give you bonus explosive damage as well. So for that fact alone, I would recommend taking it. Additionally, if you're relying on your turret's damage, these do contribute a good bit to extra damage. So of course, turret build, it's a good idea to grab it. But yeah, personally, I always grab it because that extra explosive damage is very good on a character that uses a lot of explosive weaponry. Able is a skill that I will only ever grab if I'm running a crisis management build, which we will get to later. Other than that, I don't see the value in this, because you gain an equal amount of health regen just from preparation, which we'll get to later as well. So I usually don't think it's worth the points, so I would advise against it. Grenadier is pretty much always a take, due to the fact that it gives you increased grenade capacity and grenade damage, which Axton has a lot of grenade damage, and he uses a lot of weapons that utilize grenade damage, so that's always really good to have. Plus, more grenades means more fastballs, or more slag, or just more damage, so it's very nice to have, very good utility. So when you're using the community patch as well, it swaps the location of resourceful here with crisis management, which is pretty good because if you decide not to spec into sentry because you're just not interested in the increased duration, you can just get free cooldown right here instead. So usually with the last of my points, I'll either throw them into sentry or resourcefulness. Typically I like to lean towards sentry because I usually am using the legendary soldier as a class mod and that is boosted. So I just get more value out of it, but yeah, you just remaining points go into here and that would unlock double up for you. Now, double up is a pretty essential skill on Axton. Not because it's necessary, just because it makes his gameplay loop a lot more enjoyable. Because you don't have to worry nearly as much about having to slag enemies. So it just takes a whole nother layer off of what you have to do, because a lot of people have a big issue with having to slag constantly in this game. So characters with inherent slag are always very good to have. So yeah, I would pretty much always recommend grabbing double up. So getting down this tree in some form or fashion just for the skills, 100% worth it. Next, we're going to move over to the gunpowder tree. First up, we have impact. Now, at 5 out of 5, this gives you 20% gun damage and 15% accuracy. It's not bad. If you have the spare points, I think it's a good idea to grab it. However, on the other side of the tree here, we have expertise. Now, expertise, I think, is always a skill that you want to prioritize over impact. Because, again, it just makes playing the game a lot more enjoyable. You can swap between your weapons really fast, you can aim fast, you move faster while aiming. And again, like how I said earlier, if I'm using the legendary soldier, I'll usually go 4 points into expertise and 1 point to impact just to get down the tree. Because this lets me take advantage of most of the boosts. So I will get +5 expertise and +5 in impact, which is very good. Next we move over to overload. Now, in the normal game without the community patch, I will pretty much never recommend this skill, because it only increases magazine size for assault rifles, and it's quite useless in that regard. However, in the community patch, overload increases magazine size and your backpack ammo capacity with every weapon type, which is really, really good. So it is definitely a good skill to consider. If you're doing any form of TDR checking, you 100% want to 5 out of 5 this skill instead of Metal Storm. However, in general gameplay, Metal Storm is just too good of a skill, I think, to pass up. Because Metal Storm is a kill skill that dramatically boosts your fire rate after killing a target. And that is just a lot of extra damage. Because at 5 out of 5, you get 60% fire rate here. And that's really, really good. Next up, we have Steady. Now, Steady is a very, very good skill for Axton in terms of damage. Because at 5 out of 5 here, you get 25% grenade damage and 20% launcher damage, both of which are sources that Axton uses a lot. So, unless you're not using any form of explosives, I would always recommend 5 out of 5 in here. If you're not using explosives, I'd say take these points and throw them into overload. But, yeah, I think it's just really, really good. Always pretty much a take. Next up, we have the longbow turret, which allows you to deploy your turret at long range, and more importantly, it doubles the turret's health. So, again, for that fact alone, I will always put 1 point into this skill, just because of that, the extra health. But the longbow turret also does make it a lot better at being easier to deploy far away. And the real benefit, I would say, of being able to deploy it far away is you can get the enemies to aggro onto the turret before they see you, because you don't have to get nearly as close. So it allows you to start engagements off better. Next, we have Battlefront. So Battlefront is pretty much just a free damage bonus when you have your turret out, and it's quite noticeable compared to the likes of Impact, where at 5 out of 5 you get 30% gun damage, 30% crit, and 30% grenade damage, which are all really, really good. Like, you want this skill, I would say. Unless you plan not to use your turret at all, but if you're planning to not use your turret, then you shouldn't be playing Axton, I would say. Next we have Duty Calls. Now, Duty Calls is a weird skill, because I would say about 95% of the time this skill is completely useless, because non-elemental guns are usually outclassed by elemental guns, especially on Axton where you want to be running explosive. But if you're running a very specific build, say using Jacob's weapons and like the Becca And weapons like in that vein, you can justify grabbing this skill. It's just, otherwise I wouldn't recommend it that much. I would steer clear. Now, next is what I like to call Axton's middle tree capstone, because do or die is a lot better than his actual capstone. So I like to treat this as his capstone, because essentially what the skill does is it lets you throw grenades when you're in fight for your life, which makes it significantly easier for Axton to get up if he gets knocked down, which is like super invaluable, because you'll have access to maybe like a slide grenade or just a damage grenade, and those make it so much easier to get out of fight for your life. Plus, also, you get free grenade damage and rocket launch damage here. So, yeah. You always want to go down the gunpowder tree at least until do or die, because it's just that good. Next up, the next two skills aren't too great. However, they do have niche uses, and I'll cover them anyway. So, next we have Ranger. Now, if you're not using the community patch, I would say never ever take this skill, like, ever, because it's just a complete waste of points. It only gives you +1 in each category, so you'll get like 5% gun damage, and it's like woohoo. But in the community patch, it gives +2 to everything, plus I believe it gives you more bonuses here. So at 5 out of 5, you would get 10% in all these categories here, which is good. It's just, it's hard to justify dumping 5 points into that, especially since the capstone you're working towards isn't all that worth it. So I would say about 90% of the time I don't grab Ranger, but it is there. If you really want to min-max your TDR trucks, you can also grab this for the mag size and reload speed, but otherwise, yeah, I'd say stay clear. And then for Axton's actual capstone, we have Nuke. Now, Nuke is a very flashy skill, I will give it that, but it is not very useful outside of its niche uses, where essentially when you throw your turret out, it'll set off a nuclear blast with a big blast radius that'll hit a bunch of enemies. It is useful at staggering all those enemies, giving you a chance to like just finish them off before they can even fight back. That part of it is very good. The damage is kind of mediocre. Like, it does have potency to kill, but it's not great. It boosts your action skill cooldown rate, which is quite good, I would say, given how the turret's cooldown is not amazing if you're not running like an engineer or something. But if you're using like a legendary soldier, which has built-in cooldown rate, you don't need it that much. So again, unless you're doing a like turret build where you want to utilize Nuke, I would not advise this skill. So usually in the gunpowder tree, I would stop right about here and do or die. Next, we will move on to his survival tree, which has a couple very cool and very useful skills, but it also has a couple throwaways. So for things first, we're going to start with healthy. Increases your maximum health. There's only a few scenarios where you will take this skill, one of which is if you're not using a shield with capacity, such as the Rough Rider. There's no benefit to taking preparation. So in that case, I would recommend you grab healthy. Additionally, if you are doing TDR chucking and you need to get the benefits from pressure, which I will get to in a second here, you do not want to take preparation, as preparation gives you passive health regen, and you're going to want to cap your health out. So in that case, you're going to want to go into healthy. Otherwise, it's worth throwing a point in if you want to get the boost from the legendary soldier class mod. However, preparation is just better than healthy. That's the general rule of thumb here. So usually what I will do is if I'm running legendary soldier, I will go 4 points in prep, 1 point in healthy. Because again, preparation increases your shield capacity and it gives you health regen while your shields are full, which will be a lot of the time because of another skill coming up here. Anywho, next we're moving on to Last Ditch Effort, which gives you gun damage, movement speed, and fight for your lifetime while you're down. This is... it's a weird skill because it is very, very good in the scenarios when you need to use it. So if you find that you're getting knocked down a lot, I would definitely advise 5 out of 5ing this skill, just because the bonuses are very noticeable, especially the extra duration and move speed. But I usually maybe will put like a couple points into it if I have them spare at the end of this tree, but otherwise, I wouldn't advise it. Next, you have Pressure. Now, Pressure is, I would say, more desirable here, as Pressure improves your reload speed and shield recharge delay based on how low your health is. So the lower your health gets, the bigger this bonus gets, which is why, like I said, if you're doing a TDR checking build, you want to have your health capped out, because then you can get the full benefit from pressure here. Which, if you have it boosted by a veteran class mod, you can get up to like 120, 130 something, which is really, really crazy for how much reload speed you can have. But even for general play, I would say pressure is also worth it. Just because if you get to a point where your health gate is triggered and your health is very low and you're going to die, you'll get a big bump to your shield recharge delay, which will allow you to get your shields back up faster. And Axton is a lot stronger when he has his shields up. Next up, we have Forbearance. Now, Forbearance is a skill that I personally didn't value that much until I understood just how useful its effect actually is. So it reduces the duration of status effects that enemies inflict on you, and it also gives you damage reduction if you're using the community patch, I believe. I don't know if that's in the normal game. The status effects reduction is very, very important, because you really do not notice how often enemies inflict you with status effects, and just how often you end up going down. As we're going to need to get down the tree later, I will usually end up grabbing at least a couple points in this. Plus 10% damage reduction at 5/5 is very, very good. Next up, we have Phalanx Shield. This essentially just gives a protective bubble around your turret that you can shoot through but enemies can't. There's a lot of times in raid bosses you can use this to negate some attacks, such as like Hatterax's slag projectiles. You can just throw a turret on the ground and it saves you, and it makes it way, way easier. Additionally, it also gives you shield capacity, so there's no world where you don't want to grab this skill, is all I will say. Next up, we have Quick Charge. Now, as I've been saying, Axton's all about his shield. That mainly comes down to this skill right here, where it's a kill skill, and after you kill an enemy, your shields will constantly regenerate at a rate of 5% per second if you have it at 5/5. Which I will usually recommend 5/5ing it. However, there are some situations where you don't need to 5/5 it. For example, if you're using a Sham shield or any sort of shield, like a big boom blast or whatever, where you don't need the full capacity to get the benefit. Next, we move on to Crisis Management. Now, this skill is pretty much complete garbage if you're not using the community patch. Now, if you are using the community patch, this skill has a niche use where you can combine it with the legendary Pointman, and you can get this at 10/5. And at 10/5, you get a crazy amount of damage reduction while you're using the Rough Rider. So when I start talking about builds in a second, that'll make a lot more sense, but unless you're using a no shield build, you never want to grab Crisis Management. Next is Maglock. Now, this one is very personal preference because you don't get any benefits from it apart from the fact that your turret can stick to walls and ceilings. It's personal preference. If you don't like using it that much, you don't have to. But yeah, that's all that is. Now we get on to Axton's like OP super powerful skill that everyone's always talking about, and that is Grit. So Grit is essentially just when you're about to die, the game will roll a percentage chance, and if you get the percentage chance in your favor, instead of dying, you'll hear a big clang sound, and then you'll just not die, and you'll get half of your max health. Now, this skill is very cool, and it will save you in some situations, which is why I do recommend it. However, the skill has a big problem of there's a good chance you'll get stuck in a cycle of death where your grit will keep proccing over and over, and the second that you fail the proc, you're just gonna die. Because half of your maximum health isn't really enough to get you out of a bad situation most of the time. So you'll get stuck in a situation where it'll just be like clang, 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 and then eventually you'll go down. I don't think this skill is as powerful as many people state it to be, which kind of sucks. I just wish the percentage was higher at base a little bit, but I understand why it's not. So usually in this tree, I tend to put my last couple remaining points to get down to my capstone here. Then we get to Gemini. Now Gemini is a very good skill, like all around as well, because it allows you to throw a second turret out once your first turret is already thrown. And additionally, in the patch, I'm pretty sure exclusively, it just buffs your turret's fire rate and how many shots it shoots, so it just gives you the same bonuses from Sentry and Laser Sight. It's just a fantastic skill. You're pretty much always gonna want this, and like I said, that's kind of why I treat Do or Die like the capstone for Gunpowder, because these two capstones are like leagues ahead of Nuke, so there's very few situations where you'd want to grab Nuke instead. So ideally, this is usually what I do. As you notice, at level 80, I do have an extra point here for my build. You can kind of throw it wherever you feel. It doesn't matter too much. I usually just throw it into expertise just because, you know, it's cool. You can also throw it into grit, but yeah, I usually tend to go to expertise. Alright, so now onto the next part of the video where I'm going to showcase some of the essential gear on this build, as well as some of the cool stuff you can use and some of the things Axton can do. So, starting things off, we're going to go over the effervescent items that I would recommend, those being the peak opener and the infection cleaner. Now, the peak opener is simply just a ridiculously strong grenade damage AR that can absolutely shred, like, even raid bosses this thing can kill. Its damage is just ridiculous, and I would never leave home without it. Next up, we have the Infection Cleaner. Now, this weapon is only used for TDR chuck kills against, like, raid bosses, because this weapon explodes after a certain distance, so you have to gauge that distance properly to get the most out of it. But when you do, this gun is really, really good. I would advise it 100%. As for the Seraph weapons I'd recommend on Axton, my main two would be the Leadstorm and the Omen. So the Leadstorm is just a really high damage dealing AR that shoots a barrage of bullets at big targets. So this gun is really good against like Terramorphous, and then you can also use a corrosive one against like Saturn. Just can really destroy those bosses since all of the projectiles get amp damage, like the full bonus from the B shield. So you're always, yeah, this AR is just really, really, really good. Omen is really good because all of the projectiles benefit from Axton's inherent grenade damage bonuses, and it's also a TDR weapon, so you can throw it and get a big bonus out of that. So as far as shotguns go, this is probably Axton's best bet, or at least one of the best bets alongside the conference call and such, but we'll get to those. I would also recommend taking a Devastator, interestingly enough, because on the community patch, this weapon is really, like, fun to use, and it's a nice breath of fresh air from having to always use the Unkempt Herald. So I would advise you try this gun out for a little bit of fun. I really, really like it. Next up is the Florentine. Now, Axton has always been very good with plasma casters since they benefit from grenade damage bonuses, and the Florentine is no exception, as it's probably one of the most powerful of the plasma casters. As its special abilities, it deals slag and shock damage, so you don't have to worry about slagging your targets, and this thing just shreds. Very, very good weapon for mobbing, I would say. Now, for the pearlescent weapons on Axton, probably the most slept on pearl is the Sawbar. Now, the Sawbar is a very difficult weapon to use, but when you can gauge the distance properly, Axton can absolutely destroy bosses with this thing, and it does a lot of damage. Again, the unlisted projectiles are boosted by the B shield, so this thing can just decimate like entire rooms on its own. So I 100% recommend trying this thing out. Next up, we have the Becca. Now, the Becca has always been probably the best AR in the base game, and that's no exception on Axton. This thing just, one trigger pull shoots out like a whole bullet, the bullet splits into more bullets, and there's just so much damage going out, and it's just by far the best Jacobs assault rifle in the game. And the final pearl we're going to be covering is the Avenger. Now, this weapon functions identically to the Infection Cleaner because the Infection Cleaner is a copy of this weapon. So I just have a corrosive one here in case you want to, you know, deal with like non-flesh enemies against robots and stuff. This is very good for that. Now we'll move on to some of the legendary weapons. Of course, the Layouta is by far the best sniper in this game. You can never go wrong with it, so I would advise that you at least have one on you. Again, it's not the best on Axton, but the thing is, this thing is just so good on all the characters that there's no reason not to have one. Next up is the Norfleet. Well, everyone knows how powerful the Norfleet is. This thing just decimates whole rooms. If you don't want to play the game, throw on the Sham shield, throw on a Norfleet, take advantage of all of Axton's rocket damage boosts and grenade damage boosts, and this thing will just fucking annihilate everything. You don't even have to think about it. So yeah, this is your free win button. I have a couple of these. Go ahead and use them. The Hellsters Paradise, this is also in the same vein as the Hornet legendary pistol. These both benefit from grenade damage bonuses on their projectiles. So as far as like normal pistols go, these are pretty amazing on Axton. Again, they get the full grenade damage bonus, so he can really utilize these to their max potential. So it's definitely worth giving these a shot. Here I have a level 13 Logans Gun, which you'll notice it does absolutely no damage, and this gun also sucks. The only reason I have this on me is because you can use this to generate rocket ammo if you're using the Sham shield. So if you ever run low on rockets, you just pull this out, pull up the Sham shield, shoot it at your feet, and then you're good to go. You'll be back up to full. The Volcano sniper rifle is probably at its best on Axton because this sniper rifle deals splash damage, and as such, it benefits from grenade damage bonuses. And again, you'll notice that's a trend with Axton where if something benefits from grenade damage bonuses, you're going to want to give it a shot because he really makes these weapons shine in a way that other characters can't. Next, we have a damage Bada Boom. The Bada Boom is a very solid rocket launcher, even when you're not using it for rocket jumping. So if you want to use one as a primarily damage-based weapon, you can do that. And next, we have probably my favorite assault rifle to use on Axton, which is the Ogre. Now, this AR is explosive, of course, so you get a lot of bonuses there. And also, it's a spinny barrel, so you can benefit from your Metal Storm proccing. The fire rate will ramp up like crazy. And it just does really, really solid damage. Next, I have a perfect Slaga here. The Slaga, again, you can use it for damage somehow because it actually does pretty alright. But the main reason you use this is because the slag chance on it is really good. Like, this is probably the best weapon you can use to slag enemies alongside a weapon that's going to come up a little bit later. And next, we have a low-level Bada Boom. Now, this Bada Boom exists solely for the purpose of rocket jumping. Rocket jumping in this game is just way too much fun. Next, we have the Baby Maker. This is probably the best offensive T tier weapon in the game that you shoot and then immediately chuck it just after shooting one bullet. It has the best ammo consumption value compared to others, and it just deals the most damage as it splits off into little clones of itself after it impacts. Next, of course, we have the infamous Deepa, the double penetrating unkempt herald. Probably the best all-around weapon in this game as far as just being able to do. The amount of content this thing can do on its own is just kind of ridiculous. So, of course, you can keep one on you. I haven't been using it that much because I've been preferring to use the Devastator, but it's... You can't argue with the Deepa. It always gets the job done. Next is the Flacker. I have a casual Flacker here because that's the best prefix you can get on it. Matching grip, of course. Using this gun on its own is still very good. However, the main reason I have this on me is so that I can Flacker swap with like a Creamer or an Ahab or a Wolfburn. That's the main reason I have this on me, because some of these bosses in this game I don't like fighting. So yeah, I have this. Next, we have the Conference Call. The Conference Call is probably the most infamous shotgun in this game. Even though it's been nerfed a while ago, it's still absolutely fantastic. So I would recommend you keep one of these on you. It's probably the best way to kill Hatterax as well, so you're going to want to keep this one on you. Next, we get on to the two Torgue shotguns, which are the two I would recommend you use. And when you're using grenade-based damage bonuses like the Legendary Grenadier and stuff, these two are the top dogs. So first up, we have the Sword Explosion. Here I have a perfectly rolled Sword Explosion, and this thing is just fucking crazy with the damage it can deal. It's kind of difficult to get used to using the projectiles on it, but once you do, this thing is probably the best shotgun you can use on Axton, I would say. Just because of how good it is. This thing and the Omen are pretty closely tied, but I prefer the Sword Explosion personally, but they're both amazing. And next is the Ravager, where if you shove the barrel of this thing down an enemy's throat, it'll just one-shot whatever you're looking at, because this thing does so much damage. I also have a gemstone one here, which just looks cool, and it also has a matching grip. Alright, now we move on to some of the uniques, the blue uniques. First up, we have the Fibber. Fibber is not a great gun on Axton, but the thing is, it's just a great gun in general, especially when you have the ricochet barrel. So you combine this thing with the B shield, and it just will do a ton of damage. Has a very unique learning curve to it, so not everyone's cup of tea, but again, I can't deny how powerful it is. Then we have a Lady Fist here. Main reason I have this Lady Fist is just so I can crit swap, so I can shoot a bunch of unlisted projectiles with the Sandhawk, for example, and then this 800% critical hit damage will apply to all those flying projectiles if I just switch to this gun. So that's the main reason I have it. Additionally, it also does really good damage on its own, so I have a couple of these in my vault. Next, we have a perfectly rolled Sandhawk. This thing is my... It's a good go-to if you have a boss that you don't want to approach and you just want to kind of cheese him from afar. You can kind of just use the B shield and the Sandhawk, and this will do good damage on its own. And then, of course, we have a Grog Nozzle, because it is 100% the best Moxie weapon in the game. No one can deny that. It's just ridiculously good. I keep this thing on me. If I need to quickly heal up, I can just switch to it, throw a grenade, get back up to full. You can also just shoot it. It does fine damage, really good slag chance as well. As far as Moxie weapons go, we also have the Kitten here. This assault rifle is actually really, really powerful on Axton, and it doesn't have any weird gimmick to use. All you really got to do is just run up to your enemies and use it kind of like a shotgun. And this thing will just melt, because it does really, really crazy damage. I would definitely recommend this. Next up, we have the Pimpernel. The Pimpernel is... I have a slag Pimpernel here because I mainly use it for slagging enemies. Because, one, the slag chance is really, really high, and if you just get a shot below an enemy, all of the extra projectiles will guarantee that that target will get slagged. So this alongside the Slaga is probably the two best slagging weapons in the game. And finally, we have the Creamer, and this is a very good rocket on its own as far as just raw explosive rockets go, where after a certain distance, the rocket will split into two. So if you can space it out with your targets properly, you can just deal double damage with this thing, which is really sick. As for the relics are pretty standard. I'm just using classic Bone of the Ancients to synergize with whatever element I'm using. I also have an explosive damage relic here. This is mainly the one I have on for most of the game, as I'm mainly using explosive weapons. There's also a TDR Allegiance relic I have here. This I will use whenever I'm using a TDR build or before I go for a raid boss kill using the Avenger. I will just slap this on and then I'll switch off to my fire Bone of the Ancients. As far as class mods go, there's many in the game, but the four I usually keep on me are the Veteran, the Engineer, the Soldier, and the Grenadier. Now, if you're not using the community patch, you won't have access to the Legendary Grenadier, as that's only here. So you'll have to use a normal Expert Grenadier, which you can find in a blue variant, kind of similar to the Veteran here. So the Legendary Grenadier, anytime I'm using really explosive or grenade-based weapons, this is just my go-to. Just because this allows me to get the most out of my damage. But I would say objectively the best class mod on Axton will be the Legendary Soldier, as it gives you, the bonuses are just too hard to argue with, as it gives you cooldown rate, gun damage, fire rate, and then it boosts a bunch of Axton's best skills, being expertise, preparation, ready, sentry. You also have the option of the Engineer. The only reason I carry the Engineer on me is if I'm in a raid boss fight and I really need my turret back, this extra cooldown rate is useful enough, and it also buffs a couple turret related skills like sentry, resourcefulness, Battlefront, all that shebang. And finally, we have the Veteran class mod. Again, I only use this class mod if I'm using a TDR build, because the mag speed and reload speed are very good. Additionally, we buff pressure and steady, which gives me both grenade damage and reload speed, which TDR weapons both benefit from both of those. But yeah, in general, I run the Soldier or the Grenadier. Those are my two go-tos. Now, there's a ton of grenades you can use on Axton. My personal favorites are the Meteor Shower is probably my favorite as far as like explosive damage grenades go. Next up is the Quasar. Now this is my preferred singularity of choice because it just combines the effects of a Tesla and a singularity together, which is very good. You can use it to heal up with the Grog very easily, and it also helps with grouping enemies together. My go-to grenade mod for getting second wins or just raw damage is the Fastball. The Fastball is just ridiculous for damage, so if I'm just doing a raw grenade build, the Fastball is just really, really, really good. Because it'll pretty much, if anything's slagged, it'll essentially just one-shot it, which is really good. Now, for times that I'm not doing a grenade damage-based build, I will be using a slag grenade. So my two slag grenades I use a magic missile, purple magic missile, as it sends out seeking projectiles, and those will just go out slag targets for me, which is very good. Main benefit of the magic missile is it also passively regenerates grenade ammo, so you won't have to worry about running out of grenades. But if I'm looking for more slag utility, I prefer the longbow slag transfusion, because I just throw this at an enemy's feet, it'll guaranteed slag them, and it also restores some of my health back to me. Now we move on to the final category, that being shields. First up, we have the Antagonist. Now, this shield is very useful in the sense of it has bullet deflection, and the bullet deflection sends out slag balls, which will slag targets for you. So this is just another way that you won't have to worry about slagging targets. But I wouldn't rely on it. Overall, this is just a really good shield. It has really high capacity, really good recharge rate and such. And also, you get damage reduction every time you deflect a bullet. For bossing, I would recommend the Blockade, as it's very similar to the Antagonist. However, it provides very strong damage resistance. Really high damage resistance. Can I talk? Now, the Blockade provides really high damage resistance while it is fully charged, and also a good bit when it's not fully charged. But in general, this just makes you a lot more tanky, so if you're looking for a defensive option in a raid boss fight, this is a very good option. Next up is the Big Boom Blaster. So for mobbing, if you're running a grenade-based build or a rocket-based build, this is a very good idea to use, because whenever you drop a booster on the ground, that booster, when picked up, will give you 1 grenade back, and it'll give you 1 rocket back. So it's very good for keeping up your grenade ammo and your rocket ammo. So if you're just running around chucking a ton of grenades, this thing is a very good shield. It's only really good on Axton, so I'd say take advantage of it while you can. And finally, we get to the last 2 shields, those being the Sham and the B shield. Now the Sham, I don't have a perfect Sham here, unfortunately, but I have a pretty good one. The Sham is very low capacity, but a ridiculously high absorb chance. So you can use this shield when you're running around spamming rockets, as you'll absorb your own rockets back up and won't kill yourself. I will say Axton probably gets the best use out of the Sham. So again, very, very good shield for him. And of course, to end everything off, we have the B shield, which is probably the best shield in the entire game, as when it's fully charged, you get a ridiculous amp damage bonus that doesn't go away. It has no amp shot drain, so you can just keep shooting and you'll keep getting the bonus as long as you stay at full health. The damage you can deal with the B shield is ridiculous. If you're ever looking for damage against a raid boss or something, you're always going to want to use this. I would never take it off. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the build video. Now, of course, linked in the description will be the game save, so you can go there and download it on the Google Drive and just throw it into your Borderlands save games folder and have fun with it. If you learned anything from this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you want. I'll maybe make some more videos along these lines, but we'll see how it goes. And yeah.
I'll see you in